In 1865, a man could be set free in the morning and have nothing to cook with by nightfall. No skillet, no stove, no oven, just a fire, a handful of cornmeal, and the knowledge his mama put in his hands. And out of that, out of almost nothing, our people built a way of cooking that the whole world eats today and calls comfort. They handed our grandmothers the parts nobody else wanted. The feet, the tails, the bones, the insides, the pieces white folks threw to the dogs or buried in the yard. And those women looked at that pile of scraps and made gold. Number 3 on this list is a delicacy that fancy restaurants sell today for $30 a plate. And our grandmothers invented it 100 years earlier, out of a part of the hog nobody else would even touch. Number 1 is the one that still splits a family in half at Christmas. You either love it or you can smell it cooking from the driveway and turn right back around. But our people guarded that recipe like scripture. And somewhere in the middle of this list is the cheapest meal a mother ever made. The one that kept a child from crying at night with an empty belly. So pour yourself something warm. Pull up a chair. Kettles on. Let's count 'em down. 25 cheap cuts our people turned into gold. Number 25, chicken gizzards. We start at the bottom of the bird, and I mean the bottom of what the grocery store thought was worth selling. The gizzard is the little muscle that grinds a chicken's food. Tough as a work boot if you rush it. Cheap as anything in the meat case because nobody at the front of the line was asking for it. But our grandmothers knew the secret that the price tag didn't. Time. You simmer a gizzard low and slow till that tough muscle finally gives up and turns tender. And then you flour it and fry it crisp, or you let it ride in a dark peppery gravy over rice. A pound of gizzards could stretch a Sunday plate when the chicken itself had already gone to the grown folks. Children grew up loving them, never once thinking of them as the scrap they were. That's the whole story of this list in one bite. They gave us the throwaway. We made it something you'd ask for by name. Number 24, fried bologna. Now here's one that'll take a lot of you straight back to a kitchen table. When real steak was a dream the budget couldn't reach, there was always a roll of bologna in the icebox. It was cheap. It kept for days, and our grandmothers knew how to make it feel like a meal instead of a snack. The trick was to cut it thick, not those thin lunch meat slices, but a good half-inch slab, and you'd cut a couple little notches in the edge so it wouldn't curl up into a bowl in the pan. Then you'd lay it in a hot skillet and let it blister. Let the edges go brown and crispy and the center puff up. And the smell of that frying bologna would bring children running from 3 rooms away. On white bread with mustard, maybe a slice of cheese, that was a hot supper. And here's what mattered. There was no shame in it. Everybody on the block was eating the same thing. We took the cheapest meat in the store and we made it taste like Saturday. Number 23, fish heads and fish cakes. Down near the rivers and along the coast, our people had something the landlord couldn't take and couldn't put on a debt sheet. Free fish. You needed a pole, a little patience, and the knowledge of where the fish were running. And when you caught them, you used all of it. The bodies got rolled in seasoned cornmeal and fried crisp and golden. But the heads went into the pot for stock. And the cheeks, those little nuggets of sweet meat hidden in a fish head, those were prized by anybody who knew to look. And what was left over, the bits too small to fry on their own, got mashed with cornmeal and a little onion and shaped into fish cakes. A whole second meal made from the scraps of the first. Friday night fish fries weren't just dinner, they were the whole neighborhood. The whole week's weight set down for a few hours over a pan of hot grease and the cheapest fish in the water. Number 22, pig ears. Now picture the whole hog laid out after a hog killing. The good cuts, the hams, the loin, those went up to the big house, or they went to market for cash money. What came back to our people was everything else, and that included the ears. There is almost nothing to a pig ear: skin, cartilage, a little fat, but that cartilage is loaded with collagen, and collagen, cooked long and wet, melts into something silky and rich. You simmer pig ears tender, you slice them thin, you fry them till the edges crisp, or you drop them whole into a pot of greens to give that pot liquor its body. Tough, cheap, and nearly all gristle in the wrong hands. In the right hands, our hands, a delicacy. Number 21, chicken necks and backs. When the breasts and the thighs of a chicken were sold off, what was left were the necks and the backs, bony little pieces with hardly a bite of meat on them. But our grandmothers were never buying meat when they bought necks and backs. They were buying flavor. Those bones, those joints, that little bit of skin, all of it went into a pot of water with an onion, and it gave back a broth so rich and golden you'd swear there was a whole chicken in there. That broth became the soup. It became the gravy. It became the liquid you cooked your rice in, so every grain tasted like Sunday. A dime's worth of bones, a few hours of patience, and a pot of nothing turned into the foundation of supper. Nothing was wasted. Nothing. Let me stop the count for a second, because you need to understand where all of this came from, or none of the rest of it will mean what it should. On most plantations, a grown person was given about a peck of cornmeal and 3 or 4 pounds of salt pork a week. That was it. That was the ration. When the hog was killed, the hams and the good middling cuts went to the people who owned the land, and the feet, the ears, the tails, the head, the guts, the bones came back to the quarters. Now here's the part the world gets wrong. For years, people said soul food is just the master's leftovers, the food nobody wanted. But the historians who've actually done the work, Adrian Miller, Michael Twitty, Jessica Harris, they'll tell you it's not that simple, and it's not that small. White Southerners ate those same cuts, and what our people did with them was not the act of someone grateful for scraps. It was the act of master cooks handed the hardest possible ingredients and performing alchemy. Twitty puts it in a way I can't improve on. He asks, when in all of human history has an enslaved people so completely transformed the way their enslavers ate and drank and lived? Almost never, but ours did. So no, this was never garbage. This was genius working under the worst conditions a human being has ever cooked in. Keep that in your heart as we climb, because every cut left on this list, somebody was supposed to throw it away, and our people turned it into the food the whole world now calls home. Number 20, beef tongue. Now this one surprises people today, but beef tongue was on tables all across the South, and it was cheap because the very idea of it turned most folks away. But a tongue is pure muscle, and like every hard-working muscle, it turns tender and deep and beefy when you cook it long and low. You simmer it for hours with onion and bay leaf till the skin peels right off, and what's underneath slices up softer and richer than the steak somebody else paid 5 times as much for. Our people understood something the fancy world is only now figuring out, that the cheapest cut and the best cut are very often the same cut. You just have to know what to do with it. Number 19, hog maws. The hog maw is the stomach of the pig, and I'll be honest with you the way the old folks would be honest, this one took work. It had to be cleaned, and cleaned again, and cleaned a third time. It had to cook for hours, slow, with onion and garlic and red pepper, before that tough muscle would ever turn tender. But here's what I want you to hear. Cleaning a hog maw took half a day. Our grandmothers gave it that half a day anyway. because letting good food go to waste was the one thing poverty would not allow. Often you'd find the maw cooked right alongside its cousin, the chitlins. Two tough pieces nobody wanted, simmered together into one pot that smelled like the whole neighborhood was about to eat well. Number 18, pork brains and eggs. This is one of those breakfasts you either grew up seeing on the stove, or you've never heard of it in your life. There's not much in between. Pork brains scrambled up soft with eggs. On a cold morning before a long day of hard work, it was protein, it was fat, it was fuel, and it cost next to nothing because brains were another part of the hog that came back to our people for free. I'm not telling you to run out and make it. I'm telling you that when you've got a family to feed and a few pennies to do it with, you learn to see food where other people see garbage. That wasn't a lack of choices. That was genius working inside a cage. Number 17, scrapple and liver mush. After a hog killing, there were always trimmings left, the little bits and pieces that didn't make it into any other dish, and our grandmothers had a way of catching all of it. Up in Pennsylvania, where a lot of our families landed, they called it scrapple. Pork scraps simmered down, mixed with cornmeal, poured into a loaf pan, and left to set firm overnight. Down in the Carolinas, they made the cousin to it, liver mush. Same idea, built around the liver and the cornmeal. Either way, the next morning you sliced that loaf thick and fried it in a hot skillet until the outside shattered like glass and the inside stayed soft and savory. Think about the thrift in that. Nothing went in the trash. Every last scrap of that hog got caught, seasoned, set into a loaf, and fried up into a breakfast that sent a working man out the door full. They turned the leftovers of the leftovers into something you'd crave. Number 16, smothered liver and onions. Here's one a whole generation grew up hating, and I'm going to tell you why. Because it's not the liver's fault. Liver was one of the most nutritious things our people could put on a plate. Cheap as dirt at the butcher because folks didn't want it. But pound for pound, beef liver is one of the most nutrient-dense foods on this earth. One serving carries nearly 30 times your daily vitamin B12, more than a full day of vitamin A, and the kind of iron your body actually absorbs. So why did so many children come up despising it? Because liver is unforgiving. Cook it 1 minute too long and it turns gray and grainy and tough as cardboard. The grandmothers who knew what they were doing cooked it fast, just till the pink was gone, dredged in flour, smothered in sweet caramelized onions and pan gravy, served over rice or potatoes. Done right, it was rich and mild and tender. A 30-cent meal that did more for a child's body than a bottle of vitamins. We didn't stop eating it because the nutrition went away. We stopped because we could finally afford to. The knowledge is what we lost. Now I have to tell you why the list looks the way it does. Why so many of these meals lean on cornmeal and a scrap of pork and not much else. Because it wasn't for lack of imagination. It was by design. After slavery ended, most of our people went straight into sharecropping. And sharecropping was a trap dressed up as farming. The man who owned the land told you what to plant, and it was cotton. You couldn't put in a big garden if it cut into his cotton. You needed permission to raise your own chickens. And everything your family ate you bought on credit at his store, the commissary, where the prices were double what they charged in town and the interest ran so high the debt almost never shrank. So you owed him at the start of the year, and you owed him more at the end of it, year after year. That's not farming. That's a cage with a porch on it. And that is why our grandmothers became the most resourceful cooks this country has ever produced. Not because they had a world of ingredients to play with, but because they had almost none, and a family to keep alive anyway. They cooked in the narrow space between what the man allowed and what their children needed, and in that little bit of room they performed miracles. Every dish left on this list was born in that space. Number 15, tripe. If the hog maw was the pig's stomach, tripe is the cow's, and it is the toughest thing I'll name on this whole list. Tripe will not be rushed. It will not be hurried. It does not care that you're hungry. It cooks for hours, sometimes the better part of a day, before it softens into something tender enough to eat. But our grandmothers had a relationship with time that we've mostly lost. They'd put it on in the morning and let it go, and by supper that impossible, rubbery, throwaway piece had become a rich, savory stew that warmed you from the inside out. Some of the best things our people ever made took all day and cost almost nothing. We have forgotten how to wait that long. They never had the luxury of forgetting. Number 14, pig snoots. The snout, the nose of the hog. In some parts of the country, fried snoots are still a thing folks line up for, and they trace straight back to this tradition of using every last inch of the animal. Cooked long, then crisped up and hit with vinegar and hot sauce, a snoot turns crunchy and porky and addictive. There's a saying you've heard that we used everything but the squeal. Now, the food historians will tell you that phrase actually comes from the Chicago meat packing houses, not from slavery. But the truth underneath it is real as anything. When you have been handed only the parts nobody else will touch, you learn to make every single one of them count. The snoot is proof. Number 13, smoked turkey necks. Now this one's a little newer, and it tells you something about how our cooking keeps adapting. For generations, the pork, the hocks, the fatback was what seasoned the greens and the beans. But as our people started thinking harder about blood pressure and heart health, a lot of grandmothers reached for something leaner to carry that same deep, smoky flavor, and they found it in the smoked turkey neck. It does the same job the pork did. It gives that pot of collards its backbone, its smoke, its soul, with less of the fat. Walk into a soul food kitchen today, and you'll find smoked turkey necks doing the work the ham hock used to do. That's not our tradition dying. That's our tradition living, bending to take care of the next generation, the same way it always has. Number 12, chicken feet. If I had to pick the single best example of turning nothing into gold, I might pick this one, a chicken foot. There is no meat on it. None. It is skin and bone and tendon. The butcher practically gave them away, and in a lot of kitchens, ours and our Chinese neighbors both, they were prized. Why? Because a chicken foot is almost pure collagen, and when you simmer it for hours, all that collagen melts into the water and turns it into a broth so rich it goes thick and glossy and coats the back of a spoon. That's a soup base you cannot buy in a box. That's the body and the richness that made our grandmother's soup taste like theirs and nobody else's. The part with no meat on it at all made the best broth in the kitchen. Tell me that's not alchemy. You've heard me say one word over and over on this list, collagen. Let me tell you what our grandmothers knew about it, 200 years before a food scientist ever gave it a name. All these cuts I keep naming, the feet, the tails, the necks, the ears, the tough, cheap muscles, they're full of connective tissue, and in that tissue is collagen, which is hard and rubbery and impossible to chew. If you threw those cuts on a hot grill, you'd get a piece of shoe leather. But our grandmothers never threw them on a hot grill. They put them in a pot of water, low and slow, for hours, and somewhere right around a gentle simmer. The food scientist will tell you it's about 160 to 180 degrees. Something close to magic happens. That hard, rubbery collagen slowly melts, It turns into gelatin. And gelatin is what makes a broth go silky and a tough cut go tender, and a pot of beans coat your spoon. Nobody handed our grandmothers a thermometer. Nobody handed them a chemistry book. They learned it in their hands from their mothers, who learned it from their mothers, all the way back across the water. They knew exactly how low, exactly how long, exactly when it was ready. That is not a recipe. That is science, carried in the body and passed down by heart, because writing it down was a luxury most of them were never given. So when somebody tells you this was simple food, you tell them it was some of the most sophisticated cooking in America. They just didn't have a fancy word for it. They had something better. They had knowing. And making sure that knowing doesn't disappear with our generation is exactly why I put together the Heritage Kitchen Collection. Writing these recipes down was a luxury our grandmothers didn't have, but it is a duty we have today. I spent months writing down the exact cast iron temperatures, the slow simmer measurements, and the old school secrets for every meal on this list. It's a completely printable guide you can download to your phone or computer today. Click the first link in the description to get your copy, print it out, and pass it down. Number 11, pigtails, the tail of the hog. Fatty, bony, and loaded, there's that word again, with collagen. Pigtails got smoked and dropped into a pot of beans or greens to season it, the same as the hocks and the fatback, or they got cooked down slow on their own till the meat went tender and fell off, sticky and rich and salty. Children would gnaw every bit off the bone. It's a small thing, a pigtail. But a small thing, in the hands of somebody who refuses to waste it, becomes the difference between a plain pot of beans and a pot of beans that tastes like love. Number 10, smothered cube steak. They called it poor man's steak, and that name tells you everything. Cube steak is about the cheapest beef in the whole case. It's a tough cut, run through a machine that pokes it full of little squares to break down the gristle. That's where the name comes from. Cook it wrong, and it's chewy and gray and sad. So our grandmothers didn't cook it wrong. They smothered it. You brown it quick to build flavor, then you make an onion gravy right there in the pan. Lay the steak back down in it, put the lid on, and let it go low and gentle till that tough, cheap cut surrenders and turns fork tender. Spooned over rice or a mountain of mashed potatoes, with that onion gravy soaking into everything. A family could put what tasted like a steak dinner on the table for pennies. The cut was poor. The cooking was not. That word, smothered, is one of the most important words in our whole kitchen. It means we took the cheap, hard thing and we loved it tender. Number 9, the ham bone. This is the one I promised you at the very beginning. The cheapest meal a mother ever made. The one that kept her child from crying at night with an empty belly. And it's less a cut than a strategy. The purest arithmetic of survival on this whole list. After the holiday ham was eaten down, after Sunday dinner, after the sandwiches, after every slice was gone, what was left was the bone, with its last clinging bits of meat, its smoke, its marrow, its collagen. And that bone was not the end of the ham. It was the beginning of the next meal. It went into a pot of beans and gave that whole pot its smoky soul. And here's the thing the old folks knew. That bone could go into a second pot after that, and sometimes a third. One ham bone, reused across pot after pot, stretching the flavor of one holiday meal across a week of ordinary ones. That's not a recipe. That's a mother doing math at the stove, making one thing feed her family 5 different times, from scraps to feasts, over and over, off a single bone. That was the cheapest meal, and no child who ate it ever knew how little it cost, only that they went to bed full. Number 8, smothered pork chops. When pork chops were on the table, they weren't the thick, expensive ones. They were thin, cheap, and easy to dry out into something tough and sad. So our grandmothers didn't just fry them and pray, they smothered them too. You brown the chops to build that flavor on the bottom of the pan. Then you make a gravy right there in the drippings, onions, a little flour, some broth. You lay the chops back down in that gravy, put the lid on, and let it go low and slow. What that does is take a cheap, lean chop that wants to be tough and cook it gentle in liquid till it surrenders and falls apart at the touch of a fork, soaked through with onion gravy, served over rice to catch every drop. The cheap cut, loved tender, same as always. We need to talk about how all of this almost got lost. Because between 1910 and 1970, the ground moved under our people's feet. Roughly 6 million black Americans left the South. 6 million. The National Archives calls it the Great Migration, and it's one of the largest movements of people in this country's history. They left because of Jim Crow. They left because sharecropping was that debt trap I told you about. They got on trains headed for Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, looking for something better. But when they got there, the food was different. The cornmeal on northern shelves was yellow and stripped of its flavor. The pork came wrapped in plastic instead of fresh from a hog they'd raised. And everything cost more. So our grandmothers adapted. Again, they found the cheap cuts in unfamiliar butcher shops. They grew collards in window boxes and backlots. They carried these recipes 800 miles in their heads because so many of them were never written down. And they cooked them in kitchens the size of a closet. And every single one of these meals that survived the journey survived because somebody refused to let it die. Because giving up the food meant giving up the last thread tied to the kitchen their mother kept back home. That thread was thin, but it held. For 6 million people it held. They learned that home was never really a place at all. Home was a pot on the stove. Number 7, fried chicken livers. We talked about beef liver. Now let me give you the little one, the chicken liver, because our people loved it just as hard and made it craveable in a completely different way. Chicken livers were sold for almost nothing, tucked in the bag with the gizzards, because most folks at the front of the store didn't want them. But our grandmothers would season them up, dredge them in seasoned flour, and drop them into hot grease until the outside went crisp and golden and the inside stayed rich and creamy. A shake of hot sauce over the top, and you had something people would fight over at the table. Same nutrition story as before, packed with iron and the vitamins a hard-working body needs. Same price story, practically free. But this time, instead of smothered and tender, it was crispy and bold. 2 grandmothers, 2 cuts of liver, 2 completely different masterpieces. That's the range that poverty forced into our cooking and that we kept long after we had to. Number 6, smothered turkey wings. Now this one is pure Sunday. Walk into a soul food kitchen on a Sunday afternoon and there's a good chance there's a pan of smothered turkey wings in the oven. Turkey wings were cheap because the breast was what the stores pushed and the wings got left behind. But a turkey wing is a beautiful thing in the right hands. Big, full of dark meat, with skin that goes deep golden and a joint full of collagen that melts down rich. You season them, you brown them, you build a thick onion gravy, And you bake them low and slow under that gravy until the meat is falling off the bone and the whole kitchen smells like an occasion. This became one of the great Sunday dinner main dishes in black households, a real centerpiece, a feast built on a cut the rest of the store walked right past. It looks like effort. It looks like money. It's neither. It's just our grandmothers knowing one more time exactly which cheap cut to reach for. Number 5, giblet gravy. If you grew up in a black household, this one is the smell of the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, the day the whole family came. When a bird went in the oven, there was always a little bag of parts tucked inside it. The giblets, the heart, the gizzard, the liver, the neck, the parts most people don't think twice about. And our grandmothers would not let a single one of them go to waste. They'd simmer those giblets down with onion until they were tender, chop them fine, and stir them into a rich, dark gravy. And that gravy got ladled over the cornbread dressing, over the rice, over everything on the holiday plate. The flavor of it was deep and savory and unmistakable. And it was built every year from the parts of the bird that came free inside the one you already bought. That's the lesson of this whole list, sitting right there on the most important meal of the year. Even at the feast, especially at the feast, we honored every scrap, nothing wasted, everything loved. That was the whole philosophy, and it was strongest on the day the family gathered. Number 4, Hoppin' John. Number 4 isn't a cut of meat, it's a one-pot meal. Black-eyed peas and rice cooked down with a ham hock. And I put it this high on purpose, because no dish on this list carries more of who we are than this one. We eat it on New Year's Day for luck, but its roots go all the way back across the ocean. The black-eyed pea is a West African crop. It came over on the slave ships as provision, and it survived, and we survived, and it became Hoppin' John in the low country kitchens of the Gullah Geechee people along the Carolina and Georgia coast. Now here's the part I need you to really hear. The rice in that pot is not an accident. The planters in Carolina specifically sought out enslaved Africans from the rice coast of West Africa, Senegal down to Liberia, because those Africans already knew how to grow rice. They were master cultivators. They were not brought here to learn farming. They were stolen for their knowledge. Sit with that. Our ancestors were enslaved because they were experts. They were forced to grow rice to make other men rich, and then they took the cheapest version of that very same grain, cooked it with a few peas and a scrap of pork, and fed themselves. That was the cruelty and the genius in a single pot. Hoppin' John isn't just lucky, it's a monument to knowledge that crossed an ocean in chains and refused to be forgotten. Before I give you the top 3, I need to say something plain, because it's been building this whole list. In the 1980s and the 1990s, the food world discovered our cooking. Suddenly, collard greens and oxtail and chicken and grits showed up in fancy restaurants in New York and Los Angeles. They called it comfort food. They put $30 a plate on it. Food magazines ran cover stories about this exciting new discovery. And in almost none of it, were the black grandmothers who invented it ever named. A historian named Marcia Chatelain said it better than I can. She said our food gets disregarded because it came from people who were enslaved, from people who were poor, and that the skill, the technique, the precision it takes to make this food good gets obscured. The food got elevated. The people who created it got left off the menu. So let me put it back on the record right here. What our grandmothers did was not a sad story about poverty. taking the feet and the tails and the bones and the insides and the parts meant for the trash and turning them into food the whole world now pays a premium for? That is one of the great culinary achievements in the history of this country. Not poverty, genius. Say it out loud. And then let's finish this list with the three that carry the most weight of all. Number 3, hoghead cheese. This is the one I promised you at the very top, the delicacy that fancy restaurants now sell for $30 a plate. And our grandmothers were making it 100 years before, out of the one part of the hog nobody else would touch. The name scares everybody, so let me just walk you through it. When the hog was killed, the head came back to our quarters, because of course it did. And our grandmothers took that head and the feet with it, and they simmered the whole thing for hours with onion and garlic and bay and vinegar till every last scrap of meat fell off the bone. Then they picked all that meat by hand, seasoned it hard with black pepper and red pepper and sage, packed it into a pan, and poured the cooking liquid back over the top. And here is the magic. They didn't add a single thing to make it set. They didn't need to. The head and the feet had given up so much collagen into that liquid that when it cooled overnight, it turned a firm, sliceable jelly all on its own, holding every piece of seasoned meat in place. Cold sliced thin on bread with mustard and hot sauce, it's called head cheese or souse. Now think about what that is. That's a fancy French technique. A terrine, the kind of thing that shows up on a $30 charcuterie board, invented independently, out of pure necessity, in the kitchens of black families who had a hog's head and a refusal to waste it. They were doing high cuisine. They just didn't know they were supposed to call it that. The most flavorful meat on any animal, our grandmothers always said, is the part closest to the bone. The whole head proved them right. Number 2, chicken and dumplings. Number 2 is the one that wasn't just food. It was care, made edible. Here's the cut that made it. A hen too old to lay eggs anymore was, by the standards of the world, worthless. But to our grandmothers, that tough old bird was too valuable to waste. So she went into a big pot of water and simmered for hours, low and slow, that same patience we keep coming back to, until that tough, cheap old hen finally gave up and turned tender, and the broth went golden and rich. And then came the dumplings, spoonfuls of simple dough, flour, a little fat, some of that broth, dropped right into the simmering pot, where they swelled up soft and pillowy and soaked in all that chicken flavor from the inside out. But here's why it sits this high. Chicken and dumplings was the meal our grandmothers made when somebody was sick, when there was a death in the family, when the weather turned cold and the world felt heavy. They'd cook a big pot and carry it, covered, down the street to a door that needed it. It was the dish that said somebody still loves you enough to cook for you. The cheapest, oldest bird in the yard turned into the most comforting bowl a grieving family ever held. That's not just cooking. That's love you can eat with a spoon. Number 1, chitterlings. And that brings us all the way down to number 1, the dish that still divides a family at Christmas. The one you either love or you can smell from the driveway and turn right back around. Chitterlings, chitlins, the small intestines of the hog. There is no cut on this list that carries more weight than this one. When the hog was killed, the intestines came back to our people, and turning them into food was not easy, and I won't pretend it was. They had to be cleaned by hand for hours. It was hard, humble, patient work, and our grandmothers did it anyway, year after year, and made the kitchen smell, past the labor of it, like a holiday was coming. Because that's what chitlins became. Christmas, New Year's, the big gatherings. simmered low and slow with onion and garlic and red pepper till they were tender, served with hot sauce and vinegar. Chitlins were the dish that said the whole family is here. Now let me clear up something the world got wrong, because it matters. For years people said chitlins were proof that we ate the garbage, but the historians have set that record straight. The notion came from the hog killings, where our people were given chitlins as a kind of reward for the work. And from that, folks decided this was the stuff nobody else wanted. But when you actually look at the record, white Southerners ate plenty of chitlins too. Eating them goes all the way back to Britain. This was never our shame. This was a whole region's food, and we made the best version of it on the continent. And because I love you, I have to pass along one thing the old folks couldn't have known that we do know now. Cleaning chitlins can carry a germ that's especially dangerous to little babies. And here's the part that surprises people. A baby doesn't even have to eat them to get sick. The doctors at the CDC found infants getting ill just from being in the room while chitlins were cleaned. So when you make them, keep the little ones up out of the kitchen. Boil the chitlins a few minutes before you start cleaning. Wipe your counters down with a little bleach and water, and cook them all the way through. That's not me telling you to stop a tradition. That's me helping you carry it safely to the next generation. That's what passing it on really means, because that's what number one really is. It's not a piece of an animal. It's a whole people at a table that the world spent 400 years trying to keep them away from, saying grace, passing the hot sauce, and refusing to disappear. So that's our 25. From the gizzards to the chitlins, from the fish heads to the ham bone to the old hen that became a pot of dumplings. Every single one of them was supposed to be thrown away, and our grandmothers, with cast iron and time and knowledge carried in their hands across an ocean and up 1,000 miles of road, turned every last scrap into gold. Here's what I'm asking you to do. This week, make one of these: the smothered cube steak, the chicken and dumplings, the pot of greens with a smoked turkey neck, cooked down slow the way she would have done it. And if you've still got a grandmother or an auntie or an old neighbor who remembers any of these, you call them before you make it, not after. Call them first and ask them how. Because the living recipe, the one in their hands and their memory, is always better than anything anybody wrote down. And that window is smaller than any of us wants to believe. These were never just recipes. They were proof. Proof that our people took the very least the world would give them, and made the most anybody's ever made of it. Tell me down in the comments which one your family made. Tell me what your grandmother called it, because I promise you she had her own name for it. And tell me which one you're going to cook this week. Cook it once, write it down, pass it on.